Oh man. The whole point is the shirt on here.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's right. Embarrass the shit out of yourself.
Keep the conversation, as random as possible.
And you're doing a fine job on your end.
Man, I always love doing that introduction, man. It's so fun. Hey, welcome back to JG's Lounge, everybody. I'm your host, Jukebox. We are back with another episode of Stardom, and I am super stoked tonight. I've been hanging out in the background for the last few minutes with Conner Kees, man. How the hell are you?
I'm doing fantastic, brother, and I am stoked to be here. This is going to be a lot of fun, man.
Yes. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I didn't even prep for this just as much as I know you didn't, which is going to make this whole episode just flow so smoothly.
Absolutely.
First off, the shirt. I saw you posted on Facebook.
Yeah.
Can we get that out of the way?
Yeah. So, what about the shirt?
First off, you couldn't fuck this up if you tried. And then it's got a website underneath it. Correct?
Right. Correct. So, the shirt says you couldn't fuck this up if you tried. You couldn't fuck this up if you tried is a recapitulation of the third premise of my book. My book has three main premises that I kind of put out there. And the third premise is that there's no possible way that you could mess this up, this life, what we're doing here. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
He's got
to throw it up there. I downloaded it for you.
Sure. So I decided to put premise 3 of the book in some spicy language, and I love the way it's turned out. And what I posted today is that this is actually my first day wearing the shirt in public, and within 10 minutes of sitting down at a coffee shop, one of the employees walked by me and said, "I love your shirt." So yeah, this really, I think, is, I couldn't necessarily say that this particular premise of the book is the most important premise, or that there's any one particular most important premise in general. But I think that having a strong statement and wearing it on your chest, that points us at a kind of self-forgiveness and ease, and the innate knowing that each of us has, that there's a way of being in the world which can be easy. We can lighten up, and this is something that is inherent in us, this innate ability that we have to take our hands off the wheel,
right,
and quit white knuckling this ride. And that is an extremely important message of mine, and so I decided to put it on a shirt.
It's funny. We were talking a little bit before, kind of about backgrounds and stuff like that, and I was telling you about kind of my upbringing a little bit. Well, my grandpa was my father figure, and when I was 13 is when he passed, and about a week and a half before he passed, I remember going and seeing him, and the last thing that he said to me before he passed was, "Don't waste your time being a negative person, because it takes too much energy." And I've lived by that pretty much my whole life.
From 13 on.
Yeah. Things happen. I mean, what sucks is reality. Things hit us. There's priorities that we have. There's bills that things come up, but stressing about it doesn't make it any easier either.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I've always kind of had a different sort of outlook on things, I guess. And it's actually caused conflict in some relationships of mine, because I don't react how some people want me to react. It's like,
sure.
Oh my God, there's 6 bills coming up. I should freak out. Well, it's not really the way to handle it.
Correct. Yeah. I think that's fantastic, and hats off to your grandpa,
Thank you.
And for you to have received that message at such a young age, and then taken it to heart, right? Because one of the interesting things that we see in culture, and it's an American phenomenon. It's actually something that began after the Civil War in America, with the kind of onset in the wake of mesmerism from France, and when the mesmerists came over and influenced Phineas Quimby, and then he had the New Thought movement start with Warren Felt Evans. And so people today might know people like Napoleon Hill or Neville Goddard or Dale Carnegie, and some of the authors of things like Think and Grow Rich, right? Napoleon Hill. We know some of these names. Some of your listeners may know people like Neville Goddard if they're into this kind of thing.
Right.
That is sort of the intellectual tradition, that one of the intellectual traditions that I'm most interested in. And we take it for granted that this intellectuul movement had such an impact on culture, right? So you have things like MasterCard, Imagine the Possibilities, or you have the Army, Be All You Can Be.
Right.
You have this, or you have these motivational posters in corporate offices and things like that. That is at its roots, that's an American phenomenon, positive psychology and positive thinking. And we kind of take it for granted. And one of the things that I don't think it's an issue, but I think that it's something to consider, that when we are kind of inundated with this kind of lukewarm positive psychology from Disney movies and things like this, or from Hallmark and this kind of thing, there is an actual boots on the ground way of coming into right relation with these concepts, with what we would call positivity, or what we would call faith even.
Right.
And I'm not going to go and say that like it's too bad that you have this positive thinking movement and Disney and Hallmark and all that. It's not too bad, because that would miss the point. And yet, it's actually what we've done is we've created for ourselves a situation in which finding the thread in that kind of heap of positive thinking and heap of sort of mundane kind of these aphorisms that point us to all this positivity. What does it really mean? What's really being gotten at by these statements, like the Army saying "Be all you can be"? We just take that for granted, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's funny you mentioned like a little bit of religion and Disney and stuff like that. And there's actually, I read an article about the Christian, a good chunk of the Christian belief not being fans of the Disney network, because Christianity is all about, like, believing in God and putting a faith in God. When in Disney, it's all about believing in yourself and putting faith in yourself. Have you ever heard anything about that?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
And I think there's, I mean, I don't know. What is your religious beliefs? I mean, you don't have to say it, or, I mean, I'm spiritual. But I don't believe like there's a certain God that's right or wrong. I believe there's other stuff out there. I also believe in like reincarnation and coming back.
Okay. Juke, you might want to check out my book. That is hysterical, man. I have never been asked on a podcast what my religious beliefs are. Well, and it's apropos, because one of the things I'm kind of excited to be on here and to announce that, look, I mean, I haven't done a podcast in a couple months now.
Yeah.
And it's really fun to reflect on all the changes that have happened in the past couple months with my brand and my message and the things that we're doing out there in the world. And actually to, I suppose, kind of announce, I have spoken a lot on other podcasts about how I consider my message and what I do to be a ministry. What do I mean by ministry? I suppose we can talk about that, but just, allow that word to have whatever neural connections or simmer however it needs to. I consider my message a ministry. Okay. My mother, who's in heaven, considered my message a ministry. Okay. And my message in this ministry has evolved into what Laura Rose Gage and I, who's a partner of mine and someone who I work with very closely, we have sort of evolved this this brand, this message, this thing into a ministry proper. And that ministry is called Inspiritus Ministries. And you can go to inspiritusministries.org and learn about how we are essentially making really explicit what the philosophy is here that we think is so delicious and feels so right. And it's not that there's anything wrong with the world that we're evangelizing in service of fixing anything,
Right.
That's not what's going on. But what's going on is passion, and what's going on is a desire to be in deep relation with that thing at the center of all this. Call it God, call it whatever you want to call it. I call it God,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't care what anybody calls it.
Yeah.
I care about us knowing that there is something else entirely going on here, which is also one of the premises of my book. There's something else entirely going on here. What you think metaphysically that means, whether it's reincarnation and all this kind of stuff, can actually, if we take that too seriously, it can cause us to kind of miss the point of the something else entirely that's going on here. And yeah, so my religious beliefs, what are my religious beliefs? God is good.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And God is as the kind of, not just this singular event of creation, Big Bang type, watchmaker God that created all this somehow and then stepped away from it. That creation is both complete and an ongoing process. And there's something unique about human consciousness that has a relationship with that, to the extent to which it sees itself as being a part in that. Right. So the more we kind of consciously situate ourselves as agents and participants in this big picture, well, something emerges and something happens. And people call that manifestation these days. People call that blessings and providence and serendipity and abundance and all of these things. And I think that society and culture and global culture are moving in that direction. And there's going to be interesting repercussions that we're going to see play out with that. I mean, the Pope recently, did you hear what the Pope said recently?
No.
The Pope recently came out saying that all religions are paths to God. All religions are paths to God. And I personally don't care what the Pope says, because I don't care what any one person says. What I care about is what you know to be true in your heart. Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And at the same time, I know that that's going to rustle the feathers of people who are beholden to their particular theology and cosmology and Christology and metaphysics as the one which is correct. That's going to be upsetting. And at the same time, it's also indicative of something. And again, like I said, I don't necessarily care what the Pope thinks, but I am excited that we're seeing this kind of thing be set at that level. So
that's big. Do you want me to kind of break down what my view is?
Hit it.
Are you curious? Because I would like you to
curious.
critique me and even maybe pick my brain.
Oh, I'll rip you a new one.
That's perfect. Sounds fantastic. So I believe we are created as an energy. And I think that our energies are created to learn life lessons. And in order to learn all those lessons, our physical forms don't live long enough for us to learn all the lessons that we need to learn before we can ascend to heaven or whatever it is. So, we do reincarnate. And I think, in my opinion, until we learn everything that we need to learn and lived all the lives and experienced all the experiences that we need to experience before we can get to that next level, whether that's heaven or whatever it is.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's basically it in a nutshell for me.
Yeah. Well, I think you're wrong.
That's fine. That's great.
I think you would be banned from our fellowship. You would be disfellowshipped.
Okay.
You would be stamped as a heretic.
Okay.
I'm being facetious.
That's fine.
Okay. Just being clear. Yeah.
I can take
Not
some
to,
criticism here, man. Believe
not
me.
to, yeah, I love it. Let's, all the
No, it's good.
religious
Roll on
comments.
it, dude. You can dish whatever you want me. I promise. I've never kicked somebody off the show, or have
Good.
they left. So
Good. Well, I'm leaving. So, um, so, you know, I think Jukebox, I think that the sort of story that you just reiterated to us is one that we see a lot of, that has been kind of repackaged from Western interpretations of Vedic cosmology about karma and dharma and reincarnation. What's called the Jivatman. The Jivatman is the kind of personal individual soul,
right.
which is recapitulated in these human lives to kind of, I'm not sure, kind of get squared up with Brahman or something in a way that to sort of like be free of karma. In other words, to be free of the cycle of cause and effect. So essentially, can you be so non-dualistically a non-agent in the world that your being in the world no longer carries any weight, and therefore you kind of become one with the one. Now that's my reiteration of kind of where I think some of these ideas come from. It's probably totally wrong, but I know that what we are seeing in this kind of like the kind of average person's new age spiritual but not religious cosmology
Right.
does often involve reincarnation, and it involves metaphysical concepts like energy, like you said, and vibration and things like that. And there's also this I don't know the history of this. I don't know where this comes from, but for some reason it is extremely common when asking people about what their spiritual beliefs are. If there's something like yours, they will often say that we are here to learn lessons.
Yeah.
And you may be able to tell by what's written on my shirt that I think that what's going on here is a whole lot less serious than what people often call Earth School. Earth School. So I think that it's incorrect only insofar as it creates unnecessary suffering, right? If I position myself in the world as someone or something who is here to improve.
But we don't. So
Right.
hold on.
Go ahead.
Okay. So if we're talking as far as a physical form and suffering, okay. But as us, like take us out of these these shells of our bodies,
Mm-hmm.
we don't experience pain and suffering like our physical form does. I mean,
Correct.
we learn to understand it, but we don't physically us as a being, we don't feel that. We don't feel
Yeah, totally. I agree completely. Let me be a little more clear, because I also that's a term I will sometimes use, because it's also the aim of, say, Buddhism is to end suffering in the world, right? And so and to end suffering in the world by a relationship with the world, like what we might call like non-attachment and these kinds of things. I often say things about ending suffering because it's relatable. When I say suffering, there's also a Buddhist notion that goes, pain is inevitable, like pain of the body, but suffering is optional. Suffering is something that happens in this kind of personal narrative, this cognitive fault realm of my crafted kind of ego-based relationship with the world, and this story that I think that I'm living.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
that's where the suffering is, right? So there's a distinguishing between pain and suffering.
Mhm.
Right. So the way in which I think that a the way in which I think this narrative about learning lessons can actually facilitate a person's suffering, to be specific, to be more specific, has to do with the fact that if we take that on as a story, what we're doing is we're taking on an obligation. We're
Mhm.
taking on an obligation to behave or to perform a specific task, in this case, learning, right?
Mhm.
In this case, kind of like self-improvement, self-development, learning lessons, all this kind of thing. That you can fail.
Yeah, yeah.
You can there, if it's a performance based thing which we're being invited to participate in here, then my performance has some bearing on what, if you ask certain religious backgrounds, they might say it determines actually whether or not you go to heaven or hell,
Right.
depending on what they believe. Or a softer version of that might just say it determines whether or not you are reincarnated as a millionaire or someone who lives in the slums,
Yeah.
or a rock, or and I have, that's a joke, from, I think the
I
rock.
mean, hey, pet rocks were pretty popular for a long time, man.
Not only that, I mean, what does the rock know that we don't know with these conscious minds of ours? So,
Yeah.
so what's going on here, I think, is both more complex than that, and infinitely simpler than that, right?
Mhm.
Um, what So I'm obviously, for lack of a better word, I'm opposed to this idea that we are here to learn lessons, and I think part of what this comes from is this kind of deep-seated notion that a lot of us have inherited from our religious upbringing,
Mhm.
that asked me what my religious beliefs were,
Yeah.
and the first thing I said was that God is good.
Yeah.
And if God is in some sense so intrinsically, not just connected to everything, but from, I mean, if you really want to drill in there, you really want to go cosmologically deep, God, in some sense, and I don't care about reason and logic necessarily either.
Yeah.
I'm not interested, but you could form a case that God can't necessarily create anything that's not also God, because God is this kind of one singularity at the center of all of this, ineffable as it may be. And yet to say that this world that we're experiencing is so other than God is actually to contradict what we mean when we say God. This is why a lot of people in the spiritual but not religious or / new age kind of um, whatever that we're seeing, just call it the universe.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
They just call it the universe, right?
Yeah.
And so, and that's fine. That's fine. That actually gets, for some people, more at what it is that they're trying to get in touch with than the word God
Mhm.
does. So what I think that a lot of this stems from, this learning of lessons, is kind of this weirdly packaged Western theory, and I don't care about East and West necessarily, but I'm just using this as
Right.
a kind of trope because a lot of people understand this difference between East and West.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think it's real, but that's another story.
Right.
Right, and that is to say that we inherited this kind of notion of reincarnation, which, by the way, is not entirely Eastern. Pythagoras and some of the Greeks, believed in reincarnation. They had this theory. We bring it over into the Western world, so to speak. Nietzsche was reading the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads and stuff, and Schopenhauer kept the Bhagavad Gita under his pillow. And, we've got this stuff, and yet, as Oh man, this is deep. This is
It's good.
deep.
I love it. I love it.
As people who have this is good. I love how different podcasts bring different things out of me. So as people who have these Abrahamic faiths kind of running in our blood, be them what people call Judeo-Christian, which is not really correct. A lot of people think it's really silly to say something like Judeo-Christian. So I'll just find then I'll just umbrella all of them and say Abrahamic faiths. We've kind of inherited that, but that's really deep in there. We in the 60s and 70s and in the late 1800s even inherited these Eastern concepts. We kind of mixed them together.
Mm.
And I think the issue is that somehow subconsciously buried in here is the notion that God is an asshole.
You know, I had a so I'll interview anybody.
Yeah.
I had this real nice guy on. His name's Richard Lillard. He's a Satanist.
Okay.
I was scrolling through TikTok, and he was sitting down in a group interview with some Christians and some Satanists.
Cool.
And he said something that really caught my attention. Not that I believed it; it was just the view that he expressed.
Sure.
I was like, I have to get this guy on my show. He said, one day his dad came home upset, and he drowned his brother, and he drowned his mom and his dog, and then he killed himself. And he said that wasn't actually my dad. That was God. He drowned his own children. And I was like, well, that's an interesting take on that. I mean,
Right.
but
Right.
that's just
Right.
him saying that. I was like, well, it was intense because the
Right.
way he explained it, like you
Right.
thought he was talking about his parents. So you had like these
Interesting. Yeah.
Christians, you had the Christians over here, and they're all like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, almost feeling bad for the guy. And then he said
Right.
that, and it just kind of flipped a switch. Now, I don't
Right.
necessarily, I don't agree to that point, but it was interesting to hear him say that.
Sure. Yeah. And a lot of people are wrestling with these kinds of things. They're wrestling with what we would call like the left-hand path. They're wrestling with things these days like Gnosticism. And
I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh God, Gnosticism is actually an academic term for a spiritual movement that happened in response to some of the things that ancient Judeans found reprehensible. Yes, there's the famous painting, blah, 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 blah. It's a reaction to, it's a big, deep rabbit hole. But essentially, it's pretty fascinating. I used to study this stuff a lot because I'm fascinated by spirituality and religion, always have been.
Same here.
And one of the ways that the Gnostics were kind of spiritual rebels is they created a completely revisionist. Now, first of all, some of the people who are listening to this may be familiar with Gnosticism. One, Gnosticism is a term that was created in the 1700s by academics. It's not an actual term. Not even the people that Irenaeus referred to as the Gnostikoi in his Against Heresies referred to themselves as Gnostics. No one has referred to themselves as Gnostics in history other than not modern, but contemporary people. So that's a new thing. And two, there was no one Gnostic movement. It's incredibly diverse. There's Sethian and Valentinian and all this kind of stuff. And so, but one of the ways, just to give you the short version, is to say that one of the ways that these Gnostics were spiritual rebels is they looked at the stories of the Old Testament and did a completely revisionist history of Genesis and said, for instance, that actually, just to give you the really, really Cliff Notes version, that Adam and Eve were essentially enslaved rather than in paradise, that the snake as a symbol of transformation was actually the true God coming to rescue them from Jehovah, who is actually a sort of the bastard child of Sophia, and to rescue them from the kind of the Garden of Eden in which they were imprisoned. who also created the world, and that the world is essentially evil. It's a very Platonic idea. You have in a lot of, and it's actually something, this very Platonic idea that I love Gordon White's kind of synopsis of. He says, um, matter bad, spirit good, and so you have right, you have this metaphysical and cosmological notion of the world in some sense being corrupted. This is very characteristic. In fact, it's considered, the extent to which that's the prevailing notion is considered the extent to which a movement is considered Gnostic by academics. But even Christians in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, there's this notion that the world belongs to the devil, to Mammon, and stuff like that. So you see some parallels there. Right. Anyway, look, people are wrestling with this kind of thing because they're trying to find within the world, which is interesting. They're trying to find within history and within these spiritual and religious movements some hint at something that actually feels true and right to them. Right. Some people in doing this come back to their roots. They come back to their Christian roots. I mean, there's an incredibly strong movement back to Christianity as we speak. There's ortho bros, and there's people who are attending church, these very, very kind of just love-oriented, non-denominational Christian churches, right? So, yeah. And you have people who identify as Satanists. Why? Because there's something, and you can correct me on this. I'm gonna finish this and then hand it over again. But my understanding is that one of the reasons why Satanism is such a prevailing force in the hearts and minds of some people is because they see culture and society as this oppressive force that has stifled this kind of sacred energy, this force within them, which is their desire to live and to be and to feel good and to experience pleasure and these kinds of things, which is really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because it says in Psalms, God will give you the desires of your heart, and He has plans to prosper you in Jeremiah. So I see what's going on here, and my basic premise is that you don't have to go looking outside of you for a tradition or a set of beliefs to know the truth. And we could get more into that. That is my message. But yeah, I'm curious to know what you think about all that.
Yeah, no, and I actually agree with, and then a lot of the as far as like the Satanists go, even as I'm very intrigued at looking into different religions and all that stuff. I grew up really strict Pentecostal. I went to church 4 days a week. My mom's side comes from a Mormon background.
Oh wow, cool.
Yeah, I went to church 4 days a week. We went to holidays. Were at church. I mean, we were there all the time. The biggest issue was if you weren't. The view of the church that I grew up in was that if you weren't speaking in tongues, or if you didn't have that, you didn't have that relationship with God, then you weren't doing things right, and you weren't cleansed, and you weren't pure. And then, I'd have my stepfather be there, and then we'd go home and I'd get beat. And then, so that was for about 7 years. A lot of my family did that. And then, one of my cousins came out and said, "Hey, I'm gay." But that wasn't okay. So they locked her in a room for 2 weeks and told her she couldn't be. She wasn't allowed to be gay. When they couldn't break her, they decided, well, maybe we should find a church where it's okay for there to be gay people. So then we hopped around churches until we found one that was kind of okay with it. And then I had another cousin come out about being gay, and they weren't okay with that either. They said that you don't know what you're talking about. I came from a very hypocritical, weird, cultish, what it felt like upbringing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I've went to school with atheists. I've had friends that were Satanists, and we all got along fine. I mean, your beliefs are your beliefs, but a lot of Satanists that I've met don't even believe in Satan. They just want anti-Christianity or anti-religion is really what it is.
Yeah.
Majority, obviously, there's the groups that do dabble in, witchcraft and all that stuff, which is,
Sure.
in my opinion, terrifying, because I do believe that if there is, if that stuff exists,
Yeah.
I don't want to mess with
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Right. Right. Good for you. Yeah. Good for you.
Yeah. And I think it does. I think that
Sure.
I don't necessarily believe, I don't believe in hell. I do believe that there are evil forces out there, but I don't believe in hell. The reason I say that is because, the idea of hell is, this eternal pain and suffering, but like, in order to live eternally in pain and misery, like, you have to have a physical form to process those
Yeah.
emotions. So you
Yeah.
can't. So
Yeah.
uh
That is
yeah,
that is a common Protestant view of what hell is.
really, did not know
Yes.
that.
Yeah. So, for instance, there are Orthodox Greek or Russian Orthodox priests who you can ask what hell is, and they'll tell you, or talking about Christian priests, right? They'll say, I don't know, but as best as I can tell, um, one of the most beautiful definitions I've ever heard of hell came from one of these Greek Orthodox priests.
Mm.
Uh, uh, there's a YouTube channel called 10-Minute Bible Hour. It's really good. And he interviews a Greek Orthodox priest in there. And the priest says, I think hell is, I'm going to paraphrase what he says, but I'm going to say it the way he said it, which is that to die, right? Which means maybe to kind of like be as naked as you could possibly be, right?
Mm-hmm.
In consciousness and in spirit, and so free of the physical things that we have any relationship with here in this kind of what we call 3D experience, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm.
To be naked in front of the full might of God and refuse God's love simultaneously. So this is the definition of hell, according to at least one, Greek Orthodox priest that I've heard. So,
Yeah.
This Dante's Inferno kind of notion of hell is one version of it, and there's
And
yeah.
I mean, I've done a little bit of research on the Dante. Obviously, I mean, I haven't read the book, but I know of it, and I've done some research.
Cool.
But a lot of the stuff that he talks about in there is really just jealousy and rage against things that actually happened in his actual life.
Sure.
More so,
Yeah.
even in politics, like even in some of the circles he was in,
Right.
when he was going through hell, like there were politicians that he hated and grudges that he held that were all brought into that. So on a religious level, I feel like a
Yeah.
lot of that could be thrown out the window, and because of how he interpreted it.
Right. Yeah, you know more about Dante's Inferno than I do. I'm aware at least that there's a lot of people who think that this has been kind of misappropriated, kind of, and that it was a whole lot more tongue in cheek and stuff. And the way that it was written was never meant to be kind of received the way that it was. At least that's what I've heard. I don't know. But I mean, yes. And at the same time, you know what? Juke, there are movements out there, even within Protestant Christian denominations, who are increasingly what we call universalists. Now, they have scriptural reasons for doing this. There's plenty of mainline churches who say, no, we've pretty much, you can read Jesus talk about Gehenna and what is it, the Valley of Hinnom, and all this kind of stuff from the New Testament, and say that, yeah, even Christ talked about hell, and they're like, well, actually, this is a reference to something else. There's like the gnashing of teeth and all this kind of stuff. And look, I mean, there are Protestant Christian denominations who also say that all dogs go to heaven. And I am very much sympathetic to this notion. I believe this is true. And one of the ways that I love to pitch this to people is I say, yeah, man, I think Hitler and Mary Teresa, or hell, Hitler and Christ are sitting up there having tea, listening to this conversation. And that, of course, would be terrifying.
Right.
It's kind of a terrifying thought to an ego who really has itself beholden to its what it thinks of as its right to judge. And I just don't think that's what's going on here, and
you talk about judge too, and I think that that's a big term that not just Christianity, but in general, many people judge. This, especially in today's age, I feel like majority of people, like, they look at their screens on their phones and they expect the world to be a certain way, and they judge people based off a lot of the things that they see.
Sure.
Whether it's subconsciously or not, they do it. And that's where you get your clicks and your stuff like that. But I mean, we're not supposed to judge. We're not supposed to just see somebody go, nah, they're shit. Like, that's not how we're supposed to be.
It's we have outsourced our sense of safety, our sense of belonging, to whether or not a set of conditions that we have constructed out of our memory or out of what we've been told is right. We have outsourced being okay to a perception of whether or not these certain conditions are being met in our experience. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So that right there is really a huge part of what I love to talk about. It's a big part of my message that, again, to say that there's something else entirely going on here is to say that the contents of your experience aren't necessarily accurate reflections of the fullness, the whole thing that's actually at play in these lives of ours. And people might say, of course, yeah, we've got wavelengths of light in the human eye and all this kind of stuff. And yes, I even played to that trope in Trusting Your Foundation in my book. And at the same time, to really sit with that and to kind of, there's a line in my book where I say simulation theorists eat your heart out,
Right.
Because I present some kind of theories that are that play with notions like digital physics and these kinds of things. And while all that's fine, to sit here and really grok even for a moment that this is in some sense like some kind of something, some what, name it, simulation, hologram, a dream inside of the mind of God, to know that atoms are empty space and none of this is touching, right? To know that time is not necessarily linear and that time is a perception. You really take this kind of worldview that's really big and you zoom out and you want to go read quantum stuff, that's fine. What we're not interested in is getting back into my conscious mind and forming some system of thought about what it is I think is actually going on here. What I'm interested in is feeling it.
Do you think the humans like look for something to give them the answer rather than find it themselves?
I think that it's just part of the experience that we have chosen to take part in. So it really is just kind of like the counterbalance to the expansion that the universe, that is inherent to the universe. It is sort of just the nature of what it means to be conscious in a world that I think of as separate from me, right? To think that you and I are separate.
Are you okay with a comical comment that somebody popped up here?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
man. What?
Brian Clowder said, "Do you do mushrooms?" That's good. That's good,
Oh my
Brian. That's
God.
good. That's
Thank you,
good.
Brian. Yeah,
I have, by the way, Brian. I've done them.
absolutely, man. For a while there were some of my dearest friends. I, you know, while I was getting my bachelor's degree in psychology from the, state university. At the time, it had maybe 8,000 students. At the kind of state university in my hometown. I was getting a bachelor's degree in these classrooms where, when Carl Jung was brought up, people would snicker. So I was very much, I was reading, I was studying Western philosophy and the occult and esoterica, and reading Houston Smith and Mircea Eliade in my free time. And one of the other things that I did is I described this period in my life as my as getting my self-study bachelor's in McKenna studies, and that is Terence McKenna. So Terence McKenna is a huge influence on me, not because I think he's some guru or had everything right, but I think he's definitely one of the greatest orators of maybe of recorded history. I mean, Terence McKenna was an entirely different kind of speaker, and so yes, I have great love and affinity for mushrooms, and at the same time, by mushrooms, of course, we mean psilocybe cubensis and all those friends of ours are kind of, I jokingly refer to them sometimes as our sort of hyperdimensional extraterrestrial artificial intelligence, whatever.
My
Yeah.
my first time doing them, I took way too much.
Cool.
I took 5 grams.
Yeah. Holy shit.
There was about 14 hours. 8 of those I had no control of my body. I mean, it was pretty intense.
Good job.
Yeah, no, it was fun. It was a great experience, and I did it. I learned. I wasn't scared because I knew where I was, and I was in the comfort of my home. When it first hit me, I was terrified because I didn't know what the hell was happening, and it felt like I was sinking into the floor. It was hilarious.
Of course.
Then I was like crawling to my room, and my roommate had to like help me. But I realized, you can have an amazing experience with these things if it's controlled and you know what you're doing. So I did. I started doing, 2 or 3 grams occasionally.
Yeah. Sure.
And putting myself in these peaceful surroundings. In the middle of winter, I'd go out in the snow and just sit there in the snow and just listen. And just have like these hypnotic realizations of clarity almost. So yeah, it was good. Yeah. There are good things to it.
I can count on one hand my total number of journeys with these things, and never 5 grams, but the thing is, here's what's really okay, I'm going to tell a story. This is really fun. Did not expect to be going here.
That's what the show's all about, man.
Yeah, good job, Juke. So, and thank you, Brian. So my last encounter with the mushroom was important to me for this reason. The criteria by which I knew that my reasons for wanting to do them, I knew that my timing was perfect because I had one objective in mind, and that objective was to enjoy myself and to have fun, right? So what a lot of people are using these psychedelics. Here's the thing: I'm not a fan. I'm not some psychedelic super fan. To be someone who I'm not a, you know, I'm not some psychedelic super fan. I think that actually psychedelics, because we have this kind of journeying and ayahuasca culture. In fact, Terence McKenna referred to psychiatry and psychotherapy. He referred to psychiatrists as an incipient shaman class. Now, that's always stuck with me. Now, again, no judgment, of course, and people who choose to go down that career path in life, absolutely none. And at the same time, I don't think it was necessarily McKenna's goal that this stuff be integrated with the same level of kind of both medical, mental health and kind of medical mindset that it's been integrated with, or the same kind of commercial mindset that it's been integrated into culture with. What a lot of people are doing with psychedelics is they are searching for answers. And what's interesting is they're searching for answers, ironically, outside of themselves.
Right.
When that is so what I'm saying is that ayahuasca is not going to give it to you. Mushrooms are not going to give it to you.
Right.
It's already in you. and so for us to double down on these modalities, this is something that I've said in a number of my interviews in the past, where I've talked about, you know, you've got your kind of this kind of archetypal bro or person out there who's searching from one modality, whether it's they see an astrologer, they see they go to a sound bath healing, they do cold plunges or sensory deprivation, they do ayahuasca again, they go again and again. And what it is it's they are hungry for something, and they're shopping at the kind of buffet of tools that we have that provided by culture and the market to supposedly get at that thing. And it doesn't. As a matter of fact, Juke, I used to be a professional astrologer. I had a stint there where, you know, I've studied astrology for over a decade. And I decided at one point in my career to open up astrological services to the people to my clients and to the people that I worked with. And so I was doing my own little fusion of Western astrology and human design and these kinds of things. And, you know, I came to the same conclusion that I came to actually in my medical career. So you don't know this, I don't think, but I'm an acupuncturist by training. I've been an herbalist and an acupuncturist. I've been an herbalist for over a decade. And in 2015, I began my master's degree. And yeah.
Look at that. I told you I did a little research.
Yeah. Cool, man. That's my alumni right there. That's my alumnus. So,
I do a little bit. Look up a little
cool,
bit.
Man, that's cool, man. That's really neat. I love it. So yes, you know, I'm an acupuncturist by training. You know, I do Chinese medicine, and I have come to the same conclusion again and again and again on this sort of journey of my message, what I now see as this ministry of mine. And it's that to the extent to which I participate in conversation with someone as someone who has something that they don't have, well, I am incorrect. And that to be in right relation with the fullness of what's going on here in a conversation with someone else is to hold that space. I call the work that I do one-on-one, I call it feet to the fire, because what I want to do with people is I want to hold their feet to the fire of their own innate and inherent divinity and the parts in them that have this intrinsic connection and knowledge about what is actually going on here, rather than thinking that there's something that I can tell you that you don't already know.
Right. So you got astrology, you've got acupuncture, you've got these Chinese herbs, you've obviously done a lot of reading. Where are you from, man? Tell me about you. I mean, where are you from, dude? How'd you get? How did you get? Like, I want to know, like, what was your childhood like? Because I imagine you didn't just hit 10 years old, like, you know what? I got this list, and this is my checklist right here. I'm hitting every one of these things.
Actually, it's funny. I talk about this in the book too. But at 10 years, first of all, good on you, Juke, because often, depending on the interview, these are often they can be the kind of questions where I'm actually say, no, it's not about, this isn't about me, but but you ask in a spirit of curiosity and fun.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm here for,
Yeah.
like why I did mushrooms, last time.
Yeah.
It's not about arriving at some destination, because this present moment is where it is at, right? So
Right.
it's funny you mentioned 10 years old. I did actually write at the age of 10 a treatise on the nature of God in a Word document, which has been lost to corrupted hard drives and all that kind of stuff. But I grew up drawing angels and reading the Tao Te Ching in middle school.
Did you grow up in a religious family then?
No, I can still count on one hand the number of times that I've been to a formal church service.
Okay.
So my mother was a woman of deep faith. She was a woman of deep, deep faith, and she believed that God is good and that people are good. And there were angels all over the house, little angel statues, and she would talk about this, about God and what God wants for us. And so my faith, one of the interesting things is when my relationship with religion has been a very, very, very liberal one, and kind of one that I've been kind of on the outskirts of it, like kind of the outside looking in. I was never someone who age. What age?
I'm guessing your age.
Oh, my age?
I'm gonna guess you're my age.
How old are you?
I'm 36.
I'm a little bit younger than that. I'll be 34 in November.
Yeah. So close enough.
Yeah.
Around my age.
So, and I'm a Georgia peach, by the way. You ask where I'm from? I'm a Southerner.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Been all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
I do like that you were interested in the religion rather than being forced into it.
Yeah. I have no idea what that's like, really, and it's a blessing, because I feel like my relationship with God is between God and I, and I'm going to say this, it's a little odd. I've said this on a couple interviews, and it's that Emerson said that for a man to believe that the contents of his private mind is true for all people is genius. And that for a man to believe the contents of his private mind apply to everyone,
right,
that is genius. Well, I've thought about this, and I said, well, you know what? I'm pretty damn convicted to this message and what has kind of arisen in me at this point in my life and my career, whatever the hell is going on here.
Yeah.
That I think that what I know to be true is true. And I think that what's fascinating about that is that it's not something I can tell you.
Yeah.
Because you know it.
Yeah. I mean, when we talk about like prayer and stuff like that, and people praying, and I've seen people speaking in tongues and things like that, and
mm-hmm.
To me it almost feels like it's a self-awareness more than it is like praying to something else. It's more like praying within yourself for an answer.
Say more about that. What do you mean?
And I don't think that you're not praying to an entity out there. Like, you think that you might be, But in reality, you're looking within to find the answers. Like, because I don't think what I've seen and what I've experienced with these kind of things, it almost seems like people expect results from their prayers,
Mm-hmm.
but in order to get the results, you have to be the one to go do it. Like, it's not just going to be handed to you by some benevolent entity. Like, it's if you're looking for
Mm,
cleansing,
mm,
or
mm.
that's just my view on it.
That's interesting. I didn't jump ship with you there until you said that it isn't a given, because I think that you're right that to be in relationship with this experience, with the world that we're living, in a way that carries this resonance, that carries this truthfulness
Mhm.
about the nature of life, about the nature of God, about the nature of the mind, about the nature of
Mhm.
consciousness, about the stories that we're living, to kind of like just feel into what's actually going on here and come to the conclusion that, yeah, of course, I can look out in the world and see suffering and see pain, but I know that there's something else going on here. And that actually, if I want to shine a light and be what it is I actually am, then I can point my sails in the direction of this force, of something that will move me if I just get out of the way and allow it to. Now, that is
Right.
available to everyone. That is absolutely available to everyone. And I think that that movement, the wind in those sails, actually is free and automatic and effortless, and it is a given. There
Right.
is this notion about God helps those who help themselves. There is this notion of you have to meet the kind of like there's this notion of like you kind of have to meet the divine halfway at least. And while I think that that's pointing at action, that's pointing at something that is a very complicated and not complicated thing in life, uh, doing versus being, right? I
Mhm.
think I think that uh, we're not going to construct something that's true about life from looking only at the doing or only at the action and then trying to fit being into that. I think that what's true is that getting out of the way and letting go of the wheel and stopping this white knuckling of the wheel, discovering that this is a self-driving car, that is where our inspired action and that's where inspiration and creativity and imagination and bliss and ecstasy and all the good things in life, like being a child, right? The
Right.
child does not come at life with all the sense of obligation that we as adults do.
Right.
And it says, not just in the New Testament, you must become like children. It says not only in the New Testament, it says this in the Tao Te Ching, can you be supple as a newborn child? It's the mystical traditions and the religions of the world are pointing at, it's a huge theme in Taoism. It's a huge theme in Taoism, that there's something special about consciousness before it's, in some sense, not corrupted. Some people might say that. I don't believe it's corrupted. I just believe that we, for some reason, begin to take the contents of our conscious mind for granted and then impose the structure of our experience onto subsequent experience. So we tend to believe that this is solid. We tend to
Right.
believe that we are somehow situated in this linear flow of time.
Mhm.
And when you were a child, you didn't give a shit about any of that.
No.
You did
Not at
not give
all.
a shit about any of the things that we as adults take so seriously.
Right.
And I'm really passionate about that. I call it picking up the stick. And I think that at some point for all of us, a lot of people talk about this, inner
Yeah.
child work and all that kind of stuff. I call it dropping the stick and picking up the stick. That at some point in our development, there was some moment, perhaps, in which this stick that we had was the magical staff of that we were the wizard, or it was the sword that we would rescue the kingdom with. And at some point, some adult came by and said, look, this is how to do it. You got to do it right. You can't mess it up. If you mess it up, there's going to be consequences, right? And we dropped the stick and we traded in that stick for a way of being in the world that wasn't necessarily intuitive anymore. It was instead learned. And it was inherited from other people's conscious minds and other people's narratives and stories about how to be. So
when we talk about like conscious minds and stuff, like when I was as a kid, I briefly touched, I was abused for years. And when my mom left my stepdad when I was 14, I think it was. There was a moment in my life that happened that to this day makes me feel like changed my perspective of everything.
Yeah.
And that was the day that my mom left. And then I remember it very vividly. And when I realized that that's the world I was living in for those 7 years of physical abuse and all of that wasn't how the world was. Like, I had this mindset of every kid went home and got beat by their parents or their stepdads. And that was okay. So that's why, I didn't go to school and talk about it because I thought it was the way it was.
Right.
So when I had this revelation when we left and we went and stayed with my aunt and uncle for a little while, I mean, we were struggling, but I had never been so happy in my life.
God bless your mom.
Something happened
Mm-hmm.
in my mind that was like, wow, okay, that's not how it was.
Yeah.
And so things totally changed for me after that.
Here's a question.
Sure, bring it on.
I'm gonna do an N of one survey here. And
Let's do it.
yeah. Would you, if you could go back, if you had a time machine, forget all the Doctor Who theories about whatever, blah, 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 whatever. I'm not doing all that. If you could change your past, would you?
No.
Exactly.
No, I think that I learned a lot of lessons of how to be better because of the experiences that I had.
So I'm gonna quibble, and I'm gonna at least invite maybe a way of framing this that I think. See, here's where my kind of the sort of technical aspects of my philosophy come in.
Okay.
I would frame that in terms. I wouldn't say that it's what enabled you to be better, Juke, because you are perfect the way that you are, and better again comes with this sense of
Brian agrees.
I think everyone feels this way. Now there are people who would say, yeah, I would rather not have experienced that. Well, there's a relationship with their past that actually doesn't feel good to them, and they're more identified with having been a subject of life or a victim to life than actually an agent who has a life which is inherently meaningful. And I think we all know that our lives are naturally meaningful. Right. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. So I don't think it's what enabled you to be better. I think it's just your life. I think it's just the natural consequence of the life in which you've been called to live. And it's not been this trajectory of improvement. I don't think that you could be any other than the way that you are and the way that life has made you, right? Do you see what I'm saying? So
yeah,
we put this kind of language.
It's a little off subject, but yeah.
we put this language of self-improvement and self-betterment, and it's kind of this default orientation that we have. And what I want to say is that it's not a matter of it having made you better. It's a matter of it having made you.
Yeah.
Right. Because I don't think there's any possible universe. When I talk about kooky theories, I don't think there's any possible universe in which you could not be who you are in this moment. I mean, we can theorize about these kinds of things, but you and I are having this conversation in this universe, and
right.
You know what I mean? So
yeah.
I have thoughts on possible universes, but the point is that it's all right here, and if it were a matter of betterment, then where do I get off this ladder?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I step off of this treadmill? Is it possible that I can just be a passive witness to the life that wants to move through me, that I can just be an observer and I can allow this thing to happen rather than seeing my past or my experiences as something which I have met and
So
then
do you think it should be more about being like just an observer rather than somebody who just wants to continue to improve and move forward?
I think life will improve you.
So you don't think that you have to seek it. You think it's just you need to just accept as it's going.
All of the betterment that has, and I'm using this term like, in air quotes, like all of the betterment and the improvement that you have been met with in your own narrative, in your story, in your life has come to you, and you've met it more than halfway every time. You've said, yes, this is my life. I will take this and I will meet it more than halfway. And this feels good. This is inspiration. It's all automatic.
Well,
And
I also don't I don't think it defines me. I think
exactly,
it's something that's within me, but it doesn't define me.
exactly, exactly. There's a part of you that knows that the story that's being told here is both something that you seem to be this kind of agent in, and at the same time, you are absolutely not the one who's writing this story. It's this odd paradoxical kind of balance of thinking that we're these agents in the world who are capable of doing, and that being kind of like an orientation which creeps in, right when we pressure ourselves in time or in space to kind of behave and perform a certain way. There's something in us, there's a voice that says, actually, this doesn't feel good. I would rather chill and let it happen, right? And so this is the very kind of Taoistic notion of Wu Wei. Christ said, it's the Father doeth the work, the Father in me doeth the work. And so I want people to know that life can be a whole lot easier than we make it out to be. In fact, life can be infinitely easy. Yeah,
I agree. Kind of like what I was telling you about, like not being a negative, like not allowing the negative energy to kind of control or reflect on who I am, and like a lot of the day-to-day things that we have no control over shouldn't get the best of us either.
exactly.
So
exactly.
This has been a hell of an interview, by the way, and I really appreciate you coming on. And honestly, this went a total different direction than I expected, which is even better.
Awesome.
Do you have any questions for me? I mean, I like you said, you don't really like the introduction. I love that.
Yeah.
I think that the topics we discussed were a very positive flow and very interesting topics. Brian, I do appreciate you popping in.
Yeah, thank you, brother.
Do you have any questions for me? I mean, we can go for a few more minutes if you want.
I've just enjoyed this, man. No, I don't have any questions. Yeah. I'm chilling. I was gonna say that what's funny is you're like, I know you don't do the introduction stuff, and what's actually funny is I have very effortlessly talked about my history and kind of some of the steps I've taken that have even that's not correct. So the life that has been lived through me, the acupuncture and the herbalism and drawing angels at the age of 10 and reading the Tao Te Ching in middle school, like these are all things that I can talk about that craft this kind of story and this narrative that really just I'll talk about them if they come up, but it's not necessarily what I lead with. Does that make sense? So it's funny you say, like, I know you don't do introductions, and actually I've done more of that introductory type storytelling stuff about me than I've done on many episodes. So I think that's fun.
Good.
Yeah.
Brian also asked for your social media stuff, so I will also put in the descriptions.
Rock and roll.
So I'll make sure.
Yeah, the shirt is trustingyourfoundation.com. That's where you get my book, and connerkees.com. Conner with an E, Kees with 2 E's.
What right on, man. And yeah, like I said, I'll put in the descriptions. I really appreciate you coming on. And honestly, I feel like we could go into some more topics and other discussions.
Bro, I will hop on
maybe.
anytime, man. I will hop
Yeah,
on
this
anytime.
this
has
was
been
and we got multiple shows. I have one. Do you like conspiracy theory stuff at all?
man, if you knew how far down that rabbit hole I've been in my life.
Well, because I feel like
And,
as you know, you being an astrology major, there's a lot of
I
whatever.
didn't major in astrology.
No,
But yeah.
no. Anyways, you studied
Yeah,
astrology, whatever.
yeah, it was an astrology. Yeah.
There's a lot of conspiracy theories about things along with astrology that I think
Sure.
that I would really kind of like to dabble into that aspect of your thoughts.
Sure. These are I can sincerely say at this point in my journey that I have been taken around the block, and I have thought of and have encountered ways in which my message intersects with all of these facets and features of our everyday life. The conspiracy theories, people looking to astrology for answers. I mean, these are all things that I'm excited to talk about. So yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely have you back on, man. Hey, until next time, everybody that's tuned in, we appreciate you. Conner Kees, I appreciate you, man.
Much love, brother.
Yeah, all this content's yours as well. I'll send you links when it's done. And I like to put clips out to kind of help give exposure to people that I have on as well. So until next time, everybody, we will see you around.
Rock and roll.